This table came to me from a viewer. It was made by Lane Furniture Company in 1961 and was part of their Acclaim line of furniture. The top of the table was already refinished at some point, but it's got some damage, so it will need to be refinished again. It's easy to tell that it's been refinished because the original finish would not have had such a stark contrast between the light wood around the edge and the darker walnut veneer in the middle. It would have had a more muted appearance overall. Also, the top and the legs would have been closer in color than they are now. The finish on the legs is original, but it's not in great shape, so I'll be refinishing that as well. It looks like at some point the shelf came off and someone tried to glue it back on, but was not quite successful. The whole shelf is loose, and there's some veneer that got pulled up. You can see the glue around the edges in this shot, and it looks like it might be epoxy. I'll have to take the shelf off, fix the veneer, and then glue the shelf back on. So the first thing to do was to take the shelf off. The shelf was already pretty loose, but I began by warming it up a little bit with a heat gun, just in case there was still some glue in there that was holding on. The heat should soften the glue. Even after using the heat gun, the shelf still didn't want to come off. So I flipped it over and found that there were screws, one on each side, and the screws were holding it on. So I had to dig out some epoxy from the screw holes and then take the screws out. Once the screws were out, a few pounds with the rubber mallet and the shelf fell off. Here's the underside of the shelf, and it's pretty messy. There's a lot of veneer that came off. And the dowels on one side broke. Here's the tabletop, and it's also pretty messy. Lots of veneer that got tore off and some previous repairs where the veneer was glued down, but it wasn't glued down flat. So I had to clean that up and try to get it to lay down flat. Underneath these pieces of veneer that were not laying down flat was a whole lot of dried glue or dried epoxy and little shards of wood that were keeping it from laying flat. So I tried to warm up all of that with the soldering iron to soften the glue and to try to dig out as much of that as I could. And on this piece, I used a larger iron and just heated that up and again tried to get it loose so that I could dig out whatever was in there, keeping it from lying flat so that I could re-glue it again. Once this piece of veneer was removed, I just cleaned up whatever was stuck to the underside with a chisel so that I could re-glue it and make sure that it laid flat on the tabletop. Once it was all cleaned out, I shot some glue underneath the veneer. Here I'm just using a glue syringe. And then I clamped it up. And the same for the other side, but I didn't need to use the syringe on this one. Once the glue was dry, I took off the clamps, and the repairs looked pretty good. With that complete, it was time to start stripping. As I usually do, I began by applying a nice heavy coat of stripper. I ended up leaving the stripper on a lot longer than I usually do, and I ran into a problem when I removed it. There were these streaks that went across the top in the same pattern that I had brushed on the stripper, and you can see them here, light and dark streaks. That's never happened to me before, and I'm not sure, maybe it's because I left the stripper on too long, but my solution to this was to just reapply stripper, but this time only leave it on for about 5 minutes. I didn't let it dry out, and then I removed it right away, and that got rid of the streaks. And you can still see a little shadow of the streaks in this shot, but once it dried and I sanded it and put the new finish on, you couldn't see them. On the legs, I didn't leave the stripper on as long as the top, so that came off pretty easily. And I just used some steel wool to remove most of the stripper and some mineral spirits to clean it off. And if there are any stubborn spots, then sometimes I'll use lacquer thinner to remove any finish that didn't come off with the stripper. And that's all for part 1 of this 2-part series. Stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for watching.